the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
from the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
Okay, welcome to the deep dive. So, we've got this stack of sources you sent over, reports focusing on, well, some recent financial stuff and related controversies, it seems, at the Kennedy Center.
Right, a pretty prominent cultural institution, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And what we're going to do is basically unpack the really important bits, the key details from these specific reports for you.
Think of it like a shortcut. We wade through the material you shared, pull out the main points, the surprising facts.
So you can get up to speed quickly on what these particular sources are actually saying. This whole deep dive, it's tailored specifically for you based on what you give us.
Okay, so where should we start? There was some pretty attention-grabbing stuff in there.
Yeah, let's just jump right in with maybe the biggest headline grabber reported in these sources. This claim about finding millions in fake revenue.
Ah, yes. That definitely stands out. And the material you shared points to statements from Ric Grenell, described as the interim executive director there.
That's the one. And what's really striking reading through these reports is how specific the claims about the finances are presented.
Yeah, the sources suggest Grenell reported that an internal investigation, specifically by their new CFO, Donna Ardwin, had gone through the 2024 and 2025 budgets.
Okay, and this review, what did it reportedly find? This is where that fake revenue term comes up, right?
That's right. According to these sources, Grenell reported finding, get this, $26 million in what he apparently called phantom revenue, or fake revenue, across those two budget years.
$26 million. Wow. That's presented in the material as a pretty significant reported discrepancy.
And a huge figure, yeah. And how did the sources describe sort of the seriousness of this alleged finding?
Well, the reports quote Grenell using some very, very strong language about this discovery. He reportedly described it as criminal and fraud.
Criminal and fraud, okay.
Yeah, he was apparently quoted saying they were literally lying about how the finances were, and that this finding, in his reported view, represented fraud on previous donors.
So the material you shared presents these as extremely serious accusations about past financial reporting, not just, an accounting mistake.
Not at all, based on these quotes.
Yeah.
So given these specific claims reported in the sources, what action did they say would be taken?
Well, the sources report Grenell indicated they plan to refer the whole thing to the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C.
Okay.
And that he expects the Department of Justice, maybe the FBI too, to investigate. The material also mentioned the Attorney General, who's apparently on the Kennedy Center board, had already reportedly heard the details.
Right, okay. So potentially legal involvement is flagged in the sources. Let's unpack this reported financial picture a bit more based on the documents you sent. Was the phantom revenue the only big financial claim highlighted?
No, actually. The reports you shared also go into another sort of distinct financial practice that Grenell reportedly flagged.
What was that?
He claimed that for the last 9 months, and this period apparently stretched back even before he started, the Kennedy Center had supposedly been paying staff salaries using funds designated as debt reserves.
Debt reserves, okay. Why is that specific type of fund important here, according to the sources? What's the significance?
Well, according to Grenell's reported comments in the material, these reserves were being specifically saved up year by year.
Right.
To deal with a very large balloon payment that's due way down the line in 2030.
Okay. A future obligation.
Exactly. And the claim presented in these sources is that instead of being kept aside for that huge future debt payment, these funds were reportedly being used to cover current ongoing expenses, specifically staff payroll.
So basically taking money that was reportedly earmarked for a major future debt and using it for day-to-day running costs like salaries.
That sounds like a pretty critical detail in the reported claim.
That is the reported claim in the sources, yes.
Yeah.
And again, the material quotes Grenell using really strong terms, calling this practice part of a total fraud. Total fraud. Again, with that word.
Yes, and saying people need to be prosecuted for it. So the sources really present these as incredibly serious accusations about how the institution's finances were allegedly being managed or maybe misrepresented.
Okay. Now, this is interesting because here's where the sources seem to pivot a bit. They cover another area of reported controversy that isn't strictly financial, right? It seems to focus more on the environment within the Kennedy Center, particularly around performers.
That's right. It feels like a separate issue, but maybe related in terms of the tensions highlighted in the material. The reports you provided also touch on comments Grenell allegedly made about Kennedy Center performers.
And what was the context given in the sources for those comments?
The context provided in the material relates to a rumored potential boycott by performers from Les Miserables. The rumor apparently was they might boycott if President Donald Trump were to attend a performance. So the sources present this as the sort of backdrop for Grenell's reported statements that followed.
Okay, so that was the reported trigger. And what was the reported response or the stance taken on this, according to the sources you shared?
According to the material, Grenell reportedly stated that the Kennedy Center will no longer fund intolerance. That's a direct quote cited.
We no longer fund intolerance.
Oh, okay. He's also quoted in the sources saying that actions like that rumored boycott show who isn't professional among the performers, and that producers might want to rethink hiring people who aren't, professional enough to perform for all patrons, regardless of their politics.
Right. And just to be clear for you, the listener, we're just reporting on what's in these specific sources you sent, the views and statements presented there. We're not endorsing any particular political viewpoint ourselves here.
Absolutely. It's crucial to stick to what the material itself presents.
So that's a very direct statement reported in the sources about professionalism in politics. Did the material include any more detail on that point?
Yes, it did. The sources include another quote where Grenell reportedly said, "Any performer who isn't professional enough to perform for patrons of all backgrounds, regardless of political affiliation, won't be welcomed."
Wow. Okay.
And he reportedly continued, and this is quite a quote from the material, saying, "In fact, we think it would be important to out those vapid and intolerant artists to ensure producers know who they shouldn't hire, and that the public knows which shows have political litmus tests to sit in the audience."
Out those vapid and intolerant artists.
That is certainly strong language reported in the material regarding artistic conduct and expectations.
Very strong. The sources present this as a firm stance against what's perceived as political bias influencing performances or the audience experience.
So what was the overall goal stated here as presented in the sources?
His reported stated goal, according to the material you shared, was that the Kennedy Center should be a place where, people from all political backgrounds could just sit together, enjoy a show.
Without worrying about who voted for whom. Exactly. Without focusing on politics. The sources portray this as a desired shift, aiming for a more politically neutral environment within the institution.
Okay, so let's pull this together. What does all this mean for you, having given us these sources to look at? We've taken this material you shared, and we've tried to pull out these key points presented within it.
Right. We've covered the reports detailing that alleged discovery of $26 million in phantom revenue in the budgets.
Yep. And the claims about using debt reserves money reportedly meant for future payments, supposedly being used for staff salaries instead.
And then those really strong comments attributed to Ric Grenell about performers, their reported views on political affiliations, and this idea of professionalism.
These really are the core reported findings and statements that jump out from the specific sources you shared with us.
And that's really the whole point of this deep dive process, isn't it? Taking sources like the ones you provide and distilling that essential information, the specific claims, the reported statements, so you get a clear picture of the points being raised in that material without getting bogged down.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking a bit more broadly now, but sticking only to what was presented in this material you gave us. These kinds of reported findings, these controversies about finances or the internal environment at major cultural institutions, they certainly can feel relevant for understanding some of the complex challenges and maybe the scrutiny these places face today, in the public eye.
Indeed. It touches on governance, finances, public perception, all thorny issues. So, based purely on the strong accusations of financial fraud reported here and those very clear statements about artistic conduct that are presented specifically in these sources. Here's maybe a provocative thought for you to mull over.
Okay.
What might this particular situation, as it's laid out in this material, highlight about the really challenging dynamics major cultural institutions seem to face today? Balancing their books, their governance, and managing how they're seen by the public, especially when things get tangled up with political and social tensions.
That's definitely something to think about as you process the specific information presented in these sources you shared.
Deep dive in the building. UK, what really good? Let's dive in. Get triggered. Netflix. Netflix, you son of an itch. In your show Adolescence, you pulled a race switch. The real killer teen is black, you made him white. This ish just ain't right. We're diving deep into the heart